Every time you tune in to 702,
you're not just listening,
you're making a difference.
We turn words into actions that change communities
and bring us closer to the South Africa we want to be. Every step counts.
So keep walking with us.
702.
Let's walk the talk.
Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app, DSTV channel 856
and 92.7 and 106 FM.
Welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're on 702. My name is Thabo Shole-Mashao. I'm in for Clement. We're together till 12. Great having you with us. I'm excited that your calls are still coming through and your views are still being captured on our text messages and on various platforms. By the way, you can also tune in live on YouTube and catch us. That's where you can catch the show and also follow some developments there. As tradition on this show, every Friday between 10 and 11, we have a Across the Desk feature. And in that feature, we speak to people from different backgrounds. Clement at times speaks to teachers. He speaks to, the other time he was speaking to driving instructors. I found it so instructive. It was amazing. I loved it. And today, more interestingly, subjectively so I say, we are speaking to International Relations Analysts. This is not coincidental. You'd know that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to South Africa highlights a very special political point because we are in a very complex situation geopolitically, and Ukraine-Russia conflict continues to add an interesting spice to that mix. And I'm not sure if it's just a spice, but it's a very potent ingredient because it shapes how the economy, the global economy shifts from one end to the other. Involvement of the U.S. as mediators also plays a critical role. We do know that some envoys have been going to visit Russia. But what does it mean for us here in South Africa? Why is it so important? For one, you saw the members of the MK party going out protesting against the visit yesterday. You heard the spokesperson of MK party, and he was very clear and vocal, calling the president of Ukraine a puppet of the West. That's not new at all. He's been called that by other parties, various other leaders as well. But they visit, we do trade with them. Legumes and wheat and many other things that we trade with them are very important to us. But generally, can our president position himself favorably in resolving this conflict? If not that, de-escalating the tensions. And that's why we have these experts with us to help us understand it from day-to-day basis. These are the people who deal with these matters every single day. Dr. Emmanuel Matambo is an international relations analyst. He's joining us in studio right now, sitting across me for this topic. Sir, thanks for your time. Welcome to 702.
Good morning, Tawan. Good morning to your listeners. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, good sir. And Professor Christopher Isike, international relations expert as well, joining us on the line. Prof, thanks for your time. Welcome to 702.
Dean, thank you for having me, and to your listeners as well. Good morning.
I'm going to request from both of you to bear with us as we will try to chew this in small bits. I know with you, this is what you work with every single day, and you might think that we are too elementary in our handling of issues, but we want everyone else to be with us, and that's why we have you as experts here. But maybe let's start off with you, Dr. Emmanuel Matambo, who's sitting in front of me now. The importance of Zelensky's visit to South Africa, particularly at this time, when South Africa has some serious tensions that are rather obvious with the U.S., and when the U.S. has been central to negotiating what they may want to call peace between Russia and Ukraine. And now we are in the mix. What is the significance of that? What are we missing? What is happening behind the scenes that an ordinary person like me is not picking up?
Well, first of all, we have to look at the geopolitics of the conflict in the Ukraine. And we also have to look at the fact that not the South African government per se, especially after May last year, but the African National Congress has been vacillating on the issue of whether or not Russia should be condemned for the invasion of Ukraine. So it was quite important that Volodymyr Zelenskyy was invited to come to South Africa to come and iron out maybe some of the misgivings that he has had about South Africa itself. Obviously, in the broader scheme of things, if you look at Donald Trump's 7-point plan, which came out several days back, it is really a capitulation towards Russia. So if anything, this might discomfit Donald Trump a little bit, but it is also important to note that yesterday morning, which was Wednesday in the United States of America, President Ramaphosa held talks which he said went very reasonably well with Donald Trump under the circumstances. So these are just the dynamics that we should keep in play. But obviously the visit had to be truncated because of this massive bombing of Kiev, the biggest since July last year. So that just kind of threw the spanner into the works and highlighted just the amount of pressure that Volodymyr Zelenskyy has, and he's trying to recruit allies from everywhere, including South Africa, which has shown to be a little bit vacillating on its stance on the conflict.
Professor Christopher Isike, coming back to you, do we have the requisite muscle, political muscle, geopolitical muscle as South Africa to truly wrestle with this issue adequately? Are we best positioned to do that? Do we have the capacity to do that? Or are we just a small feature in a very lengthy orchestra of this ongoing music?
I think I'll go with you with the later part of your conclusion. Especially at the time, if this was what the world was before Donald Trump became president of the United States for a second term, I would have said yes, South Africa was going to be a role player, even though they had kind of abandoned the peace process they started in June 2023. When President Ramaphosa led some African delegates to both countries to try and mediate the conflict. At that time, and with a Biden that respected South Africa's role in Africa, and also you see in South Africa as an inroad, a friendly ally in the BRICS, right? I would have said yes, but with a Trump that is hell bent on trying to bring the conflict to a close, not because of the substance of the issues, but because of his own, his personal profile, electioneering inanities, because he had said that he would end this conflict within 24 hours. Now I hear that the new deadline is within 100 days. So he's someone that is speeding, is taking over, is taking control of the whole peace process. One would have thought that South Africa's invitation, although this invitation to Zelenskyy was done in September last year, one would have thought that would have even annoyed Trump the more. But the fact that Trump called President Ramaphosa is a good thing, that at least they are now beginning to talk to each other, even though it's on the Ukraine now. But it's interesting that he did make that call, and they both agreed that the war needs to end peacefully and soon. And I think that it's also an indication of the fact that Trump is getting increasingly frustrated with both Ukraine and Russia. And so reaching out to a country like South Africa could then, help, since South Africa happens to have good relations with both countries.
Dr. Matambo, a lot of South Africans have issued serious criticism to the government when it participated in the International Criminal Court proceedings, and a lot of people were saying, we've got serious problems of ourselves. We don't need to be involving ourselves in far-fetched conflicts and inviting enemies that would have otherwise looked away. Now we have become the center of things that are far away from us. A number of South Africans have said that. What do we stand to benefit from playing a role, especially in this efforts of de-escalating tensions between Ukraine and Russia? what is the dog? What is the dog in this race? Do we have a dog in the race? Why should we even care? Someone in Tembisa is sitting there and perhaps bored and saying, why is Thabo even talking about this? Let me just play my music because it's fun. But why should we care?
Well, first of all, we are living in an increasingly globalized world where we can no longer say, well, what happens in one corner of the world that does not affect you. It does affect you in ways that you cannot readily realize. Let me give you a proper example of Russia and Ukraine, actually. So first of all, there's a moral aspect to it. I think this comes from 1994 and how South Africa negotiated its transition from apartheid to democracy. It was a transition that was miraculous, according to some other people who expected a lot of bloodletting and a lot of bloodshedding. It wasn't. It was also a moral authority that was personified in the person of Nelson Mandela himself. Bill Clinton, the United States president at the time, writes in his memoirs that he hoped that South Africa's moral authority and its peaceful transition to democracy would actually spark the same burning for peace elsewhere in the world. So at a moral level, South Africa feels vicariously what a lot of suffering peoples feel. That is why even South Africa has been vocal on issues such as the issue of Palestine. Now, that is at a moral and political level. When it comes to a practical level, if you look at the Ukraine and Russia, these are two countries that are very critical to the global supply chains. Ukraine, we can speak about the issue of grain. Russia, we can speak about the issue of natural gas, the issue of nuclear energy as well. From 2022, when the hostilities started, Africa was losing about millions of tons of grain that were not coming from Ukraine, especially when the trade routes were closed by Russia. So that is something that directly impinges on Africa, and it is quite important that countries such as South Africa are vocal about it. Because remember as well, when you let authoritarianism and aggression thrive in one part of the world, you might think as if it's distant, but in a world that is social media, where news travels within seconds, you will see that the sparks of nationalism, aggression can actually spark to the rest of the world as well.
011-883-0702. It's 19 minutes after 10 o'clock. My guests, Professor Christopher Isike, International Relations Expert, and also in studio with me, Dr. Emmanuel Matambo, International Relations Analyst. And we are looking at the Russia-Ukraine conflict on the backdrop of South Africa playing a role, the visit of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy as well, coming at a very interesting time. And I would like you honestly to engage these two experts thoroughly and meaningfully, and that's why they are here. It could be that at times media touches only on the aesthetically acceptable arguments of this conflict. We are at least attempting to go a little bit deeper, finding some solutions, seeing angles that otherwise would be obscure to us as individuals who don't often frequent these terrains. So I would love to hear from you on 011-883-0702. Alternatively, send a voice note to 072-702-1702. And Professor Isike, whenever someone mediates or tries to be a partner in conflict resolution of any sort, they need to come with very little blemish and subjectivity to the table. In this instance, many of us know from pronouncements, from public utterances, from media statements, but also more importantly from visuals that are publicly available, that someone like Donald Trump is definitely leaning towards one side, and that side is Russia. I'd like to interrogate you on the ethical stance of this particular mediator, and to what extent can they be effective if they carry this very clear dark cloud above their head? Or are we simplifying things?
Well, not necessarily. I said earlier on that Trump's interest in resolving this is not much about the substance as it is about his, personal idiosyncrasies in meeting campaign promises and posturing to the world that he is one who brings an end to conflict, irrespective of how that is achieved. And that's a cause for concern. And that's why it's important to always match your, foreign policy values with your national interest, and ensure that, they align also with your foreign policy actions, right? You will recall that South Africa also had a bit of this coming a blemish, if I'm to use your word. Yeah. When this war started, it also kind of was very pro-Russia, if you recall. Yes. And then it retracted when, of course, it realized that if indeed friendship ties, solidarity ties with the USSR, during the apartheid days was the basis of that capitulation to Russia, then it also has to include Ukraine, because Ukraine was part of that USSR period, right? So in fact, there were more direct benefits from Ukraine, than from Russia itself. If you look at how the geographies between Ukraine and Russia. But South Africa has stepped back. And started, acting properly in the UNGA and that was what informed its decision to be involved in the peace process, to speak to both parties and then welcome Ukraine to the country. So going back to the US, it has kind of done a volte face on how it has, presented itself in the last 70 years globally. For example, the principle that, you cannot annex or change territories or change sovereignties of countries through war, through the use of force. Yeah. Now, one of the terms of this 7-point plan that has been proposed is for, Ukraine to give up, Crimea. And that did not need to really even be in the discussions right now if you're talking about ceasefire, right? Yes. But they put it up because all they're interested in is to make Russia happy, and forgetting the fact that Ukrainian soldiers, both male and female, are the ones that are actually in the battlefield, even though American weaponry is helping to fight that war. So you cannot then discountenance the yearnings and aspirations of Ukrainians, including their president, because they are actually at the receiving end of whatever violence Mr. Putin is effecting on Ukraine.
And I mean, he's leaning towards the Ukrainian side. Also, you mentioned the issue of Crimea, and that Zelenskyy was very vocal that he doesn't recognize that as a Russian state. But I would have thought that that's a red herring. There are pertinent issues on the table at this present moment, and using that to divert from the current conflict is but looking for an excuse to justify perhaps your incompetency in resolving the conflict, or justifying your allies' stubbornness in coming to the party and being effective, especially when they are an aggressor. Professor Isike?
Yeah, absolutely. And his response was stop, Vladimir. That's what he put on his truth social media outlets. Stop. I mean, that is very childish in my view, because if you really want Russia to stop, there are pressures that the United States can exert on Russia to force it, to discuss. But it appears that it is only interested in disparaging Ukraine and Zelenskyy, and not putting any kind of pressure on Russia. You recall that of all the countries that were tariffed all over the world by Trump, Russia significantly was not included in that. And you wonder whether, that was because, for example, is part of the deal to try and sweeten Putin to accept whatever, is being proposed in order to achieve his aim of saying, well, Biden started the war and I, Donald Trump, ended it, and I am a deal maker, right? Those ephemeral, celestial considerations seem to drive his government and his foreign policy approach,
Yes.
and it's dangerous, for the world we currently live in and the kind of world that
Sure.
we are going to live in the coming future.
Dr. Matambo, is Trump, and the same I would like to ask for our president, given that he's a president of the country, but also the president of the ANC, are they legitimate arbiters in this? Do they have the requisite bona fides? Do they carry sufficient neutrality to be sober brokers of this conflict?
Well, when it comes to Trump, I think the answer is pretty much obvious. I was listening to John Bolton the other day, who was a previous national security advisor to Donald Trump, and he said Trump's interest is not really to side with Russia, but Trump's interest is to side with Vladimir Putin. And that was very instructive, because remember when there was this Russian hoax that Trump caused a hoax about interference in elections. So Trump feels a certain personal affinity with Putin. He actually said it openly himself. He said, well, we suffered a lot with Putin when we were being accused of Russia having interfered in the 2016 United States election. So he feels a certain affinity with exactly that he doesn't feel with Volodymyr Zelenskyy. And then if you look at the 7-point plan that the Prof Isike and I spoke about just now, I'll give you 4 of those 7 points, by the way. The first is that Russia, that aggression should stop, and that the two parties should keep the territories they have. Now, that is effectively giving Russia the Donbas region, which is eastern Ukraine. The second point was that Russia should keep the Crimean Peninsula, which it illegally seized in 2014. The third point was that that I would like to highlight was the fact that Russia should actually the tariffs that were imposed, the sanctions that were imposed on Russia in 2014 should be repealed. These are the grounds, by the way, on which Russia was ejected from the G8, which is now the G7. And then the fourth point I'd like to highlight is this mineral deal now that they've been talking about to Ukraine. Now, if you read these 4 points here, they are actually a capitulation really on the part of Ukraine. If Ukraine admits to that, then it would have lost a good percentage of its territory. So on that basis, we can simply say that Donald Trump is really not an honest broker in this. When it comes to South Africa, even if it doesn't have this requisite economic and political or economic and material heft to bring to the conflict, at least it has a good track record of siding with powers that have been negatively oppressed. And Prof Isike already said that South Africa has kind of recalibrated its stance on the issue, and today it stands as a more credible broker than the United States, even if it doesn't have the economic and material clout that the United States can master.
Yeah, I mean, and it's quite interesting times in the country that at times then what's taking place in the party has to be something contrary to what's taking place in the government. Just as much as we have seen John Steenhuisen wearing his government hat, shaking Xi Jinping's hand and having to smile and exchange pleasantries with him. And those are some of the interesting things that we have to see now. It's exactly 10:30. Please, gentlemen, stick around. I want us to explore all these themes with you a little bit later on.
Let's walk the talk. Words have tremendous power.
At 7:02, we use ours to inform,
Connect and spark real change. But we can't do it alone.
so join the conversation,
Add your voice.
and together we'll turn words into meaningful action. 7:02.
Let's walk the talk. Streaming countrywide on the Prime Media Plus app, DSTV channel 856.
And 92.7 and 106 FM. 7:02.
24 minutes to 11 o'clock. Thanks for sticking around with us for the past hour and a half. Is it almost 2 hours now, right? Yeah, that's what it is. My name is Thabo. I'm here on 702 in for Clement, and we together till 12. Great having you with us. We are just delving deeper into the Russia-Ukraine conflict that has been taking place, especially on the backdrop of the president, together with his delegation, visiting South Africa. The president of Ukraine, that is Volodymyr Zelenskyy, visiting President Cyril Ramaphosa in the country. And to what extent does that affect all of us here in South Africa? Does it help to de-escalate the tensions? Does it position us favorably in geopolitical landscape? Or does it do more harm, given that we have been enduring some bit of blows, especially from the US of recent? That is 011-883-0702. 011-883-0702. My guests, Dr. Emmanuel Matambo, International Relations expert, together with Professor Christopher Isike, who is also in that space as an expert, and we are just peeling this very interesting onion. I'd like to hear from you. Your views really matter, and especially when we have experts of this caliber with us, for you to engage with them, ask them questions, try out your theories with them, and let's see how it goes. 011-883-0702, 011-883-0702. There was a text message here that I wanted to take to air. It says, South Africa was vilified on its stance on Ukraine just a few months ago, yet today it is hosting Zelenskyy. Can your so-called Western educated experts explain how United States held such differing views between Biden and Trump on the same conflict? Yet on Israel's terror against Palestine, there is a complete enabling of Israel by both Republican and Democrats. I'll throw you the question over to you. First, Professor Matambo, then I'll go to Professor Christopher Isike, who's on the line. And I must say, I apologize for the insults of being so-called. That doesn't help an argument, however differing you may be with someone who's positing something. But so it is what it is. So I don't know if we can just focus on the substance of that, Dr. Matambo.
I will answer the question in two parts. The first part about South Africa's changes over Ukraine, and I think I'll dwell on one of the most important things that President Ramaphosa said yesterday during his remarks with Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Was one of the first sentences he mentioned when he said, "We are calling for the return of children." Ukrainian children that are being held in Russia. Now, that was indirectly saying Russia has actually committed a war crime, because that was the basis, by the way, on which President Putin was slapped with a warrant of arrest from the International Criminal Court. So I thought that was important. And as Professor Isike said, South Africa had to revise its stance on this issue, because if you look at Russia as having helped South Africa, well, Russia did not exist in its current form until the Soviet Union dissolved. So what helped South Africa was the Soviet Union, and Ukraine was actually an industrial hub of the Soviet Union. So that is why South Africa has temporized its stance on that. And rather than being vilified, South Africa, that is, by the way, it should be praised, because people change according to new information and new data that you get. The second part about the United States having a consistent stance when it comes to Israel, you also have to look at the personal interest of the United States itself. And no one can discredit the power of the Jewish lobby in the United States. When it comes to Donald Trump, it was expected actually that he would support Benjamin Netanyahu and what he's doing, for two reasons: America's foreign policy consistency when it comes to Israel, and the fact that one of Donald Trump's biggest donors, Marianne Adelson, is actually a staunch supporter of Israel, and she has been backing Donald Trump to the hilt. So it was expected, because Donald Trump is people call him a transactional president. For him, what appeals to him at a personal level is eventually what filters into the foreign policy space as well.
Professor Christopher Isike, do you want to attempt following up on that one?
Yeah, but I will start by educating the caller. When we say we should ignore and focus on the substance, we do not educate, and I'm an educator.
Sure.
So my education to the one who posed that question is to say, look, he is literate. He learns English. He speaks English, which is a foreign language, a Western language. He probably went to some school and learned education that is also Western. So I agree that we should begin to decolonize a lot of these things, but you do not decolonize them by pointing fingers at others, because when you do so, your four fingers point right back at you. So he must be careful about the use of words in that regard. And I will join him to see how we can help to decolonize what we teach, how we teach, and what we're doing. We're doing that at the university already.
Yes.
But we do not need to be insulted in that sort of way.
Exactly.
But to get back to the substance, I have said previously, and I've posed this to State Department officials, asking them the question of whether the state of America has not been captured by Israel. All right? And that is the crux of the question that this person has asked, that these countries can be, these two parties, the Republican and Democrat parties, can fight and bicker over everything, but there's one area they agree on, especially in foreign policy, and that's the case of Israel. And that is because of the amount of money, Dr. Matambo mentioned in his talk just now, amount of money that the Israeli lobby funnels into elections in America, and they do this to both parties. So a lot of people are beholden to the Israeli lobby in America, and that's why we need to ask the question of state capture of American politics, by Israel. But the second part of the question too that is important to talk about is the inequality of beings, in terms of the world being bifurcated along two zones of beings and non-beings. The beings being our Western brothers and sisters, while the non-beings are the rest of us who are not necessarily white. And you can see that in how the world responded to the Ukrainian crisis in 2022 of February, while at the same time there was a war that was killing people in Ethiopia. The responses were different. And we've also seen the responses in the world, the outcry that we've seen from America and the rest of the Western world about the killing of women and children in Ukraine. But the same Western world is not very vocal about the killing of women and children in Gaza. So this inequality of how we see and relate to humans is at the base of the international system, and the warmongering, the empire building, and the use flexing of power to conquer those that are seen as non-beings. And this is what must change if we are to have, a better world. And I think that, like the Professor Amita Bhattacharya has cautioned, the making of a new world order presents an opportunity, to make changes. And the making of that world order is not only about material or military power, it's also about ideas and values. And this is why I think a country like South Africa, it will be useful in presenting values that show that we are one humanity, and that can be the basis of changing how we see and relate with one another globally.
Very interesting. 011-883-0702. Here's a question for both of you again that says, please ask your guests, and it comes from Raymond in Diepkloof. In all this conflict, can they remind us listeners what is the cause of this conflict, bearing in mind that NATO promised the Soviets in terms eastwards expansion? Are Russian interests taken into consideration? Dr. Matambo?
Well, when you look at what Vladimir Putin said just before he invaded Ukraine, he talked about this esoteric idea of denazifying Ukraine and all that kind of stuff, which was quite strange because how do you denazify Ukraine? Because actually, for a lot of people that do not know, Volodymyr Zelensky's grandparents actually languished in concentration camps during the Second World War. So that was a quite strange casus belli on the part of the Russians. Now, when it comes to NATO expansion, there has been a lot of vacillation on that particular fact that, Russia feels a little bit besieged, and that the fact that after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, then the NATO has become an anachronism because it was expressly, according to people now, it was expressly prepared in order to make sure that they limit the aggression of the Soviet Union. But this was at the height of the Cold War. So, based on that part of the argument, Russia actually has some ground to stand on, to say, we have Georgia that has been attempting to join the NATO. Now we have Ukraine also trying to. Yes. So it's like NATO going back on its word. Yes. Although Trump at the moment has made it clear that he's not, that argument on Ukraine possibly joining the NATO has been foreclosed. But we have to look at what exactly was said at the start of the hostilities, and what was said at the start of the hostilities on the part of Russia was that they were trying to denazify Ukraine.
And Prof. Isike, is this justified, the continuous onslaught on Ukraine, based on what the listener is asking, that some promises were not fulfilled, and it brings the argument back home a little bit, and I don't want us to digress on the issue of Zimbabwe and the certain accord. But does this then create a proper justification, given that there are some serious political concerns? This conflict can be attributed to promises not being fulfilled, and Russia's threat, Russia's feeling the threat of the expansion of NATO and eventually being an existential threat to its sovereignty?
Well, look, until now, I don't think anyone in Europe, not even talk of NATO, had any mind or intention to get close to Putin and then destabilize Russia and take over Russia. So the potential does exist, and the threat can be real, but it did not exist until now, I can tell you. Because you must also ask the question of, I agree, like Dr. Matambo said, that there is ground to stand on, and the caller or the one who sent the message does have the point. But the other side of it, because we should also be wary of the danger of a single story. The other side of the story is to ask the question of why former, USSR allies, countries that were affiliated to Russia, why most of them are afraid of Russia and preferring to go to NATO to secure them from Russia. He was asked that question, right? And the answer to that question, because at the end, when the Cold War ended, when the USSR disintegrated, the thinking, the glasnost and perestroika, the thinking behind these two concepts was that Russia was now going to allow free trade and to go for it to prosper, right? Now, if that was the intention and that was followed through by President Putin when he came on, Russia would have prospered and would have even been feared. This war has helped to demystify Russia in many ways, and that's a subject for a different discussion. But the point is that there must be a reason why these countries are worried about security from Russia, because of the tendencies that Russia has shown to them, and so they run into NATO, right? And they run into NATO exactly because of the fact that there's been no guarantee. I mean, a country like Ukraine agreed with Russia in 1991 to give up its nuclear weapons to get security from Russia. But because Putin has this empire expansionist idea, a nostalgia about the USSR, which which came out from his speech. If you listen to his 1-hour speech on the 22nd of February 2022, just a few hours before he launched his attack, the whole hour was spent expressing nostalgia about how Russia at the USSR was, how it was a mistake for Russia for the USSR to break down, and how Russia is no longer respected. So he has been nursing this feeling of we are not respected enough, some kind of make Russia or make USSR great again mantra. And for me, that idiosyncrasy is what is driving his action more than economic and security considerations, which no one would have dared until 2022 when it attacked Ukraine.
Yeah. It's 9 minutes to 11 o'clock. You're on 702. My guest, Dr. Emmanuel Matambo and Professor Christopher Isike, International Relations Analysts. And we are speaking about the Ukrainian President Zelensky's visit to South Africa, the conflict between Russia, South Africa's role, and given that the party that has got the majority, at least of seats in parliament, the ANC, is leaning towards Russia, and they've got ties, as Dr. Matambo had said, with USSR, its predecessor then, and now they are leaning towards, as far as the party is concerned, towards Russia. And in government, can they be sober, direct, neutral, arbiters in this conflict. And we are touching on everything that has to do with Russia and Ukraine and on the backdrop of South Africa's involvement. I'd love to hear your views on this. 011-883-0702. 011-883-0702. And before we go to your calls, Dr. Matambo, just briefly, the political footwork that the ANC has to play between party and government. Because party-wise, I think the stance is very clear. And I haven't heard or seen anything, especially in the subcommittee of international relations within the ANC, that has shifted drastically from Russia's positioning. The political footwork that they must maintain surely is a bit inconvenient, because on one hand, wearing a party hat, they must go to Moscow and profess something else, and the party side pretend to be neutral.
Yes, indeed. There is need for some dexterity on the part of the African National Congress. And this is perfectly understandable. But I think what has been happening since May 2024, last year, when the Government of National Unity came into being, has been a more sober discussion about this. I think the support of Russia on the part of the African National Congress was kind of embarrassing on the part of the African National Congress, judged against the case against Israel, because these things cannot easily be separated if you compare them. So it is quite important at the moment that as government, they chart a sober route, and the sober route is the fact that Ukraine was invaded. I don't think there's any discussion about that. Although, yes, at the part of the African National Congress, they have to realize that uncomfortable truth that what Russia's been doing is internationally unacceptable.
Let me quickly squeeze in one call, Sputnik in Soweto. Interesting name, given that we are speaking about Russia. I don't know if this is very deliberate. Sputnik, hi, welcome.
Thanks, Thabo Shole-Mashao. Mine is quite short, and
yes,
I think one of your commentators has tried to address it. The fact that the conflict doesn't actually just emanate from 2022.
Yeah.
The issue of NATO expansion is beyond Ukraine. NATO has expanded towards the border of Russia, which was part of the agreement when the USSR was dissolved, that NATO will not expand to the borders of now Russia,
yes,
because that's a security issue that Russia has raised all the time. But secondly, is that the term of Zelenskyy ended in 2024. How is it that nobody is questioning the democracy of him running around as president when his term has ended and he has not had any elections in Ukraine? In the meantime, he is to be regarded as president. It's just a question of interest.
Sputnik, I'll give it to the experts to respond to this. Is it Sputnik Ratau that I owe a bottle of potent something to?
I will not go further. My Russian name might make you to have to
compromise
spend more.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, good sir. Gentlemen, we have about 20 seconds each to respond to that. Maybe I'll come back to you, Dr. Matambo. Prof, let's start with you responding to Sputnik's question there.
Quickly, part of the agreement when the USSR dissolved in 1991 was also to for Russia not to intervene in the internal affairs and politics of its neighbors, the countries that made up the USSR. Russia has under Putin, went back on those promises.
Yes.
And that's what I was saying earlier about the reason why these countries have started feeling that, if they can't get security and protection from Russia as agreed, then NATO could be, an option. That's one. The second question about democracy, countries do not do elections when they are at war.
Yeah.
Okay? So long as the people of because we're talking about the elections, democracy, if the people say, okay, we can't have elections now, we are a wartime president, carry on until the war is over, and then, so be it. We cannot, from as outsiders, now begin to ask questions around those forgetting.
Prof, sadly, I have to stop you at that just to give Dr. Matambo just 20 seconds as well. Sadly, we are out of time. I apologize. I'm not being rude. Dr. Matambo?
Prof has covered the first part, so I'll just go right to the second part there about the issue of democracy. Democracy is not just expressed through voting, which is more like a ritual, by the way. It's just one of those things there. But remember that during wartime, actually certain liberties from citizens are actually suspended in order to make sure that there is survival of the nation. So I think that is what Ukraine had in stake when those elections were postponed.
Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Dr. Emmanuel Matambo, International Relations Expert, Professor Christopher Isike, International Relations Analyst. Thanks very much for your time. 3 minutes to 11.
Politics isn't just about policies and power plays. It's about people. It's about you. I'm TD Madia, and on Politricking, we go beyond the headlines. From interviews with politicians to the voices shaping our society, we break down the stories that matter and why they matter to you. Stay informed, stay engaged. Stream Politricking with TD Madia now on primemediaplus.com or on ewn.co.za.